This is the Pentax K1000. It's a brutally simple mechanical SLR that retailed for only $299 with a kit lens when it came out in 1976, which honestly made it a very popular camera for literally anyone. Because of the popularity of these cameras, you can find them almost anywhere. Thrift shops will get them all the time, or flea markets, and if you look around online, you can find them for pretty cheap. But it does depend on the condition of the camera and what accessories come with it. And also, it depends which variant it was, because there were a few different versions of it, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But if you're a millennial like me, or maybe a little bit older, there's a good chance that you didn't even have to buy one, because there was probably somebody in your family that shot a film camera and passed one of these down to you. And a lot of the people that I know that have them never bought them. They just kind of inherited them. And if you have a K1000, or if you inherited something else, drop a comment below. I find it incredibly heartwarming to hear how people got into photography, and I love learning the stories behind their cameras. What makes this camera so special is that it wasn't designed to be a flagship camera. And as far as features go, it doesn't really have any. It's your basic settings, and that's about it. There's no self-timer, there's no depth of field preview button, there's no motor drive, there's no auto advance or auto rewind, and the only electronics in it are for the light meter, which you don't even really need to use the camera. The result of all of that was a camera that's very easy to learn, apparently quite easy to repair, and that in turn made it a popular choice for a lot of photography schools. In fact, I think it's safe to say this camera taught more people photography than any other camera. I've been using it on and off for the last couple of years, and compared to some other cameras I own, this one's always really easy to come back to. And obviously, I think it's primarily because of its simplicity, but the camera also feels really good in the hands. It's a good size. It's got a bit of weight to it, but it's also not the heaviest of film cameras, and yet at the same time, it still has a build quality that feels quite premium. The film advance is nice and smooth. The tolerances of everything are really tight. And although the viewfinder on the back looks kind of small, I often shoot with my glasses, and for some reason I don't have a huge issue using this one. I still get a pretty good field of view when I put it up to my eye, which is not something I can say for all cameras. It is worth noting that although the camera didn't fundamentally change in the 21 years that it was in production, there are several variants of them that are only really noticeable by these tiny, small details. The three main variants of this camera are the Made in Japan version, the Made in Hong Kong version, and the Made in China version. Although I think technically they might say assembled in Hong Kong and assembled in China. The Made in Japan ones are probably the easiest ones to spot because they have the Asahi logo on the top prism, as well as the top plate and the bottom plate would be made of brass. But they only made them in Japan for the first few years before moving the production to Hong Kong. Another very obvious indicator for the Japan ones was that they would have Asahi Optco engraved somewhere, as well as the serial number, and those were later replaced with stickers for the Hong Kong and the China versions, I believe. And whether or not your serial number was on the top plate or on the bottom plate would help identify whether your camera was made earlier when it was made in Japan, or if it was towards the end of the Made in Japan ones. If you really start going down the rabbit hole of K1000s, you'll also realize that there's not just one version of the Made in Japan ones. The earlier Made in Japan ones were even a little bit heavier than the later ones, and they came with 55 f2 instead of coming with the 50 f2, which I have here. And then when they moved production to Hong Kong, apparently some of the earlier versions were made with leftover parts from the Japan factories. So there are some made in Hong Kong versions that are kind of like hybrids that were partially made in Japan and assembled in Hong Kong. They did also eventually release a K1000 SE, which was the special edition and came with a split prism focusing screen. And throughout the years, they did start some cost-cutting measures like using plastic for the top plates before ultimately discontinuing the camera in 1997. Unofficially, some collectors have noted that there were even more nuanced little differences over the years, like changes to the battery cover doors or the strap lugs. The exact shape of the pentaprism apparently might have changed over time. But according to Pentax, they are all still technically the K1000 with the exception of the SE. I don't think most people should get too hung up on some of those nuanced little differences because a lot of them were cosmetic, but I guess if you were purely a K1000 collector, maybe you would. If you're thinking about buying a K1000, I think you really need to ask yourself, what kind of buyer are you? Are you buying it to collect the camera, or are you buying it to use it? Obviously, there's two major schools of thought to this. Some people might want to seek out the original made in Japan version because they might think it's slightly superior in quality. But it's also worth noting that those bodies are considerably older, so maybe it's harder to find them in really good condition, or maybe they weren't stored properly all these years. So if you're buying a camera to use it, maybe I think it would be safe to argue that you might be better off looking for a newer version, even if the top plate is plastic. Maybe the rest of the camera is going to be found in better condition. One of the biggest reasons the K1000 or any of the other Pentax K-mount bodies are still viable today is the K-mount itself. You literally have access to decades and decades of lenses that were made for this mount, and a lot of them are quite affordable compared to many Nikon or Canon lenses. The most common lenses you'll find are obviously like the 50mm f2 and the 55 f2 that came with the camera body, but you can also find, I think there's a 50mm 1.4, and there's a really great portrait lens that's like an 85 1.8. Not to mention, there's also a bunch of older thread mount Takumars that can easily be adapted to these, and a lot of film shooters get into this system specifically for those lenses. What I love is that the lens ecosystem matches the spirit of the K1000 itself. The lenses are small, tactile, all metal, and full of personality. If you like vintage glass, old cameras, or shoot film, I'm trying to create content that gives a little something back to the film community here on YouTube. So, as I'm sure you know, if you hit the like button, it will tell the algorithm to show this video to more like-minded people. And if you subscribe, you won't miss my next video. Now, I'm sure you're eager to see what this camera can actually do, so let me show you some photos. This particular gas station was a Seaway Gas in Cornwall, Ontario. And as far as I could tell looking at the booth, there were signs about wearing masks and COVID-19, so it must have closed shortly after the pandemic. This entire roll that I'm showing you guys today was from a 365 film challenge where I tried to take at least one picture on film per day for a whole year. And if you've never done a photography challenge before, I encourage everybody to try one at least once. I think you're going to come out of it a better photographer no matter what, but I'm going to do a whole separate video about that another time. So if you couldn't tell from the colors already, this is a roll of Kodak Gold 200. It's not my favorite film stock by any means, and to be honest, I think it's a little bit overhyped. And all of the shots on this roll were shot with a 50mm f2. That little distracting thing at the bottom of the frame was actually like a giant cinder block that had a little bit of a water puddle in it, and I was trying to do something with the composition where I could use the reflection a little bit to try to make something interesting, but I don't know if it really worked. I think it kind of just made for a distracting foreground element. For the second shot, I don't think the composition really worked. You could tell I was trying to find something a little bit wider, but I still had a bit of that distracting foreground element, and the lampposts and the sign are cropped a little bit weird. Then finally here, my third shot, I got the frame that I like the most. If you didn't spot it already, one of the things I liked about this frame more than the other ones was that the diesel sign is intentionally cropped in a way that parallels what the image is doing. It's a little bit, maybe too much, but I just like that now it says Seaway Gas dies, and I think that's kind of funny. This fourth shot is another abandoned gas station. Again, I saw a puddle and I tried to do something interesting with it, but I don't think it really worked, so we'll move on. This shot here of the lone gas pump is maybe one of my favorite frames from the entire roll, and it's probably one of my favorite shots that I shot all year. And the funny thing is I got it on the second day of this film challenge. In the last few years, I've been heavily inspired by the works of Jason Lee. He's forever been one of my favorite skateboarders, and I've collected most of his photography books, and some of the works in there have heavily influenced the way that I see things on film. And obviously, I think that shows in the way that I shot this gas station here. And this one inside the booth at the gas station, you can see that there's been some vandalism. The windows are broken, and there's quite a few things left behind, but I think one of the things that stood out to me was this Worm Kids sign. Here's another angle of the booth at the gas station where you could see the Worm Kids sign from the other side. I was trying to do something with the leading lines here, but I don't know. I felt like this composition doesn't really work for me. It doesn't do too much. This is the same screen that I shot on the first frame of the GW690 roll. It's one of the screens at the abandoned drive-in in Laval. I was trying to play with the negative space on this one and frame the subject to the left and then have some foreground elements and the water reflection. On the other camera, I framed the screen to the right side of the frame, and on this one, I tried to do it to the left to see if I could do something a little bit different. But I think I preferred the one that turned out on the Kent mirror a little bit more. This shot could have been nice, but I think what I would have preferred if the screen was more in focus. Clearly, I was a little more focused on the stuff in the foreground, and I guess I kind of regret that choice because the focus is the screen and not the plants in the foreground. This shot is definitely one that pops for me. I did a very similar frame on the Kent mirror roll. I think this one I prefer seeing it in colors. I think there's a nice contrast between the sky and the stark shadows of the back of the screen. This one's a little bit of a throwaway shot. I was trying to test the lens flare on the lens, but it actually, I think I remember it flaring a lot more through the viewfinder, and it didn't really show up too much in the picture, but I'm sure a lot of people would have some issues with the little fragments of blue there, but it's not too bad to me. I kind of like lens flares, so I was actually a little bit disappointed that it didn't flare more than this. On this shot, I was trying to crop off the subject, the car, and find something that felt a little bit unsettling. I think what doesn't work for the photo for me is that there's maybe a little too much going on in the background, and maybe you see a little too much of the car for the kind of vibe that I was going for. I think now if I was to reshoot something like this, I would probably be looking for a frame that's closer to this. But again, it's just another frame that doesn't totally work for me. So this is a scene inside of the drive-in theater in Saint Eustache, and they have this little seating area that I couldn't quite find an angle that captured the vibe that I was seeing there. Like the booths felt like they would be just generally very photogenic, and I was trying to do something by including the mirror on the right side of the frame, but in the end it just ended up being a little bit distracting. And once again, I probably would have preferred to do a shot that really just focused on just the benches, perhaps a little bit more like this. Again, another shot that had a little bit more potential, and I kind of failed to get exactly what it was that I was looking for. I like the vibe of this place, and I was trying to just capture some of that essence, but I don't really like the composition on this one. I like the Coca-Cola sign, and maybe I could have done something more, maybe showed a little bit more of the counter, but there's probably a reason I framed it like this. Maybe there was a customer or somebody to the left just outside of the frame that we're not seeing. This is a shot that I find kind of funny. So I remember when I saw this, I was just driving down the boulevard and I saw this Quiznos that was clearly out of business and had this porta potty right out front. So I wanted to try to capture the essence and that vibe of, maybe trying to allude to a connotation that Quiznos was shitty or whatever. I remember I tried to shoot this shot a little bit flatter, like a Wes Anderson style, straight on and centered, but I couldn't quite get the frame that I wanted because of what you don't see in this shot is that there's actually some cars to the right. So I couldn't get the right distance to the building. And I opted to go for this one instead to try to do something with some architectural lines. But, the shot's kind of composed okay. I feel like the lighting's just a little bit too flat for this subject and for this film stock. This was an abandoned trailer that I saw that I also shot on the Kent mirror on the 6x9. And I think I like the composition of this one a lot better than I do my Kent mirror shot. Obviously, that one was in black and white and this one's in color. So the subject and the environment has a little more contrast and stuff going on. But again, I'm not really a big fan of Kodak Gold in overcast lighting. I find it to be a little bit bland. Much like this shot, I find this to be a little bit bland. I think this was the back of a mall that was undergoing some renovations. And I think this was the side of a restaurant on that mall. These were some skylights in a hallway leading up to the doors and the entrance of that mall. I was trying to go for something that had a bit of minimalism to it, but there's not much. It's just some weird pools of light and shadows. This was an abandoned garage that I came across. I really liked the colors here, and I think this is maybe a situation where Kodak Gold kind of works on an overcast, is when you have some reds and some browns. This shot, this angle, I think works a lot better for the subject. I like the framing a lot better than the previous one. In this case, I don't mind the graffiti on the side, and again, much like the gas station shot, there's a little wire running out to the left side of the frame, which kind of alludes to that there's something else in that environment, but you don't quite see what it is, and I kind of like the idea that there's something else happening outside the frame. This was a failed attempt at capturing some details at the same location. This shot, I like the colors. I like what's happening here with the colorway, but I'm not crazy about the composition. I don't know why I didn't show the door. I remember there's a door at the bottom part of this building, but there's a good chance that maybe there's a car or something in the front that was just blocking it. So definitely the angle's not working for me. And this is a great example of how when you're doing a 365-day film challenge, sometimes you don't feel inspired or you don't know what to shoot. And clearly that's what happened here. I don't know what I expected this shot to look like. I think I was just at that sort of fuck it point where you're just trying to get a shot in for the day. This, I think, was taken a few minutes later, and I remember thinking that maybe I could do something with the layering and the depth in this shot. But again, it doesn't really do much for me. And maybe the shot would have worked a little bit better if I focused just on the stairs and the door instead of trying to capture the whole space. And here's a forest in St. Jerome. And I remember, again, I was just trying to see if I could get this lens to flare a little bit more because of how much I like lens flares. But again, I didn't really succeed at that. And it's just kind of a bland shot of a forest. And I think that's the last shot on the roll. So who is this camera for, and should you actually pick one up today? First of all, it's genuinely made for people that want to learn photography, not just for people that want to shoot film for the aesthetics or the cool factor. Because there's no automation to lean on, you're really forced to learn everything there is about shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. It's also really great for people that are just coming back to film because they're tired of overly complicated cameras. They want something simpler that's reliable and that just kind of does its job. And in that sense, the K1000 is kind of unbeatable. And for collectors, it's a bit of a gateway camera. You could start here and end up deep in the Pentax ecosystem with multiple versions of this and tons of K-mount or Takumar lenses. It's probably not for you if you want automation, but I think that's why a lot of people have been coming back to film cameras over the years. Compared to shooting digital, it definitely does slow you down, but there's no reason you couldn't still be fast with a camera that's this simple. What keeps me coming back to the K1000 isn't just what it does, it's what it represents. And I think that's the part no one ever really talks about with this camera. It isn't just one of the most common film cameras ever made. It's also one of the most commonly passed down. There are thousands of people that are out there shooting it that didn't buy it. They didn't research it. They didn't even choose it. It just ended up in their hands through family, or found in a drawer, or in a storage bin. And somehow that feels right for this camera. The K1000 was never meant to be impressive, and that's kind of what's fun about it. It doesn't just feel like you're shooting a film camera, but it feels like you're continuing something. And this particular one was my father's, which is why I'll never sell it.